All right, good morning, everybody. Let's we got 26 people, but it's already a couple minutes after 10, so let's get moving. I am recording the meeting today. Thanks for showing up. Just a couple programming notes. I want to thank Lori Duhan and everybody who participated in the LMI subgroup. It sounds like they've reached a close to a consensus document. We'll talk about that in our next meeting. So if I forget at the end, please somebody remind me. And we'll also talk about the policies. I'm not sure when I said we were going to talk about those, but there's been a request to push it at least to 11 o'clock. So we'll push that off. With that said, got a few things to get through today, namely items hopefully 7 through 10 and 11. So why don't we just kick things off with the discount rate. I know there were a couple proposals floating around. Are we still stuck at the 1% plus the adder or deflator? I can't remember what it was, or the Sheldon's proposal.
Judge, I think I can give an overview of where we're at on that.
Probably better than I can. Yes, please.
So we've got, I think OPC, their discount, I proposed 2%. That was based on what I think is using the same method as the feds did for their 3%, but then updating it with most recent historical average treasury bills. OPC then in the last meeting proposed, went through and gave their recommendations in the spreadsheet, in our worksheet, covering all the various topics. The one issue that they left open, that Dylan in his presentation, was the discount rate. And they said they were 1% or 2%. And so we actually, in the worksheet that I just sent out, have both of those scenarios for OPC. And then the utilities sent their proposal yesterday, I believe, and they're pretty much everybody's in line, I think, on pretty much everything except the discount rate, where the utilities were 3%, but also the boundary issue is still hanging out there. And there's another issue that I will raise after we get through those topics. I want to share some discussion I had with Chris Nemi that will be relevant to all this too.
Okay, great. Sheldon.
Joe, just to be clear, you were talking about the discount rates that we proposed for the valuation of carbon, but I think the other issue is what discount rate do you use for the societal test, which was where we had settled on 3%, or BG had recommended 3%, other parties had said 1% plus the 2% inflation, which is roughly the same. And I know you think that we don't necessarily think you need to tie the two together, but that's for further discussion.
So yes, then I am unclear. Your proposal in the worksheet that I just sent out, I can put it up on the screen if you like, if anyone wants. But the joint utilities discount rate that you have at the bottom there is, you say the current federal discount for federal rate. The current federal rate is 3% real. So are you saying, I was interpreting that as 3% real?
That's right, 3% real. Yep.
And that would be used for the are you saying then that you would use that for the carbon, social cost of carbon, but you would not use the same discount rate for other things?
If we were forced to tie them together, then we're going to get what we currently have for the societal test, which is 3% plus 2% inflation. And I don't think we want to go there. I think that's pretty high for that. But if we're pretty firm on the 3% for the cost of carbon, consistent with federal policy right now, we're also willing to be flexible in terms of the societal discount rate that gets used in the societal test. So we would not necessarily tie them together.
Sheldon, in terms of the flexibility on the societal cost test discount rate, what are the utilities thinking, or are you just
for the societal test, the discount rate that we currently have is 3% plus inflation. Other parties have proposed 1% plus inflation, which we would be okay with, except that we think it's simpler just to use a flat out 3%, which would pretty much mirror that. So for the discount rate that would get used in the overall societal test, we're at 3%, or if people preferred it, it gets a little more complicated, 1% plus a 10-year average of inflation. And I didn't hear much dispute about that, other than I think, as Joe points out, there might be a dichotomy between what we're saying for the cost of carbon.
All right. Thank you, sir. Dylan, you had your hand up, sir.
Thank you, Your Honor. Dylan Voorhees with VEIC, working with OPC. And Nicole can hop in if I'm not sort of recollecting our discussions well enough. I think, Joe, you did summarize it pretty well. A couple of additional thoughts. One is, I think, Your Honor, I think this is going to be challenging to resolve. And at some point here, we might want to sort of cut those strings and move forward, in part because we are waiting for this federal agency to update, its work, which should happen, relatively early next year. And so it may be difficult for OPC and for others to really firmly sort of settle, even notwithstanding the fact that there is some distance. So I think a little more discussion around this morning is probably helpful, but that's my take on the situation. The other thing I would say is I think OPC does see the advantage of having the discount rates both for carbon and other values in the social discount rate be the same. But we're not wedded to that if it's going to sort of force us to have a carbon value that's too low, for example. It may be that there is a happier medium, which would use a 2% real rate for the social cost of carbon. And that, if you use the same discount rate for a social discount rate, would be 2% plus inflation, which is about 2%, which is not quite as low as OPC had originally proposed and would prefer, but would be a slightly lower than the current discount rate. And I think there is agreement that the rate should come down. So it may be that there's a position that would preserve consistency of rate, that would result in a higher carbon value than the utilities have suggested at 3%, but it would be not as high as the 1% carbon values, which are certainly quite high. So that could be something that I think we would be comfortable with that. But again, I think it may be a little bit tentative. Thank you.
Understood. Dylan, before you mute yourself there. So OPC would be good with a 2% for the societal cost test, 2% plus inflation. And what were you thinking for cost of carbon? Again, I know we want to wait and see. You guys want to wait and see what the
that's right. I mean, at the 2%, using the carbon value at the 2% level, okay. But all of that is pending a review of what we see from the working group.
Understood. And when you say early next year for the Fed, what early means?
It was either January or February.
Okay.
Others might know. I don't think it's later than February, but of course that's subject to a federal process. So don't put all of your marbles in that basket. But I think that's the intent. Maybe we can look that up.
All right. Thank you, sir. Dan.
Thank you. Dan Hurley with Commission staff. I guess the question I have is, what's wrong with maybe coming to an agreement of using that federal rate, and then we'll see what it is when it's when it's actually calculated? Is there? I'm trying to see what's the issue. What are the concerns about waiting for that number? Are we worried it's going to be too high, too low? I guess I have some concerns that, I want to make sure that we're not kind of, I don't say, quote unquote, rigging these calculations to make sure we have the benefits that we need to have. So I'm just trying to get a better understanding of what the issue would be of agreeing on using the federal rate, and then kind of waiting to see what that rate comes out to be.
Hey, Dan, are you in, Dylan, I'm sorry, before you jump in, Dan, are you in favor of having the same rate for the cost of carbon and societal cost test, or kind of splitting them up like Sheldon had suggested?
Yeah, I'm trying to understand the reason behind splitting them up, but I mean, I think we're more on the side of having the same rate. But I'm trying to understand why we would split the rate between those two areas. I need a better understanding of that.
All right. Thanks. Dylan, you want to jump in, and then Sheldon, I'll get to you, sir.
Yeah. So Dan, I think that we do have an opportunity to at least sort of tentatively say we think that this is the discount rate, that we want to use a social discount rate, and we think we should use this value and this discount rate value, and then see where the chips lie. I think that is an option. I think 3% feels too high for OPC. So if we were trying to reach some compromise on 2%, I think we might be able to get there. And that would also, I think, address the issue of consistency, because I would tend to agree that we would, all things being equal, would use the same rate. And if you use 2%, then you would also be able to sort of slightly lower the social discount rate that's being used.
Can I propose one possible alternative? So you could just use whatever the feds do when they make their update. They haven't made an update since 2003, so it's been 18 years. I think the presumption is that they're going to use the same method that they used before. As Dylan says, anything can happen. But and if they do use that same method, it's going to be something below 2%. The one possibility would be, which suggests go to 2% now in anticipation that that's going to happen. That is actually why I recommended 2%. Another option is to say we're going to adjust every year based on whatever the method is. If that's the average 30-year average of 10-year Treasury notes, and even if the feds don't update it, that's our method, and that's an easy update to make where that discount rate changes per that method. So that's an extreme, that's one step beyond just waiting for the new version. Is actually the fact that they did not update their numbers, does not make us necessarily not update our numbers if we agree with the method. The method being the 30-year average 10-year Treasury notes.
All right, thanks, Joe. Sheldon, sir, you had your hand up.
Yeah. The reason why the utilities are proposing 3% is we think it wouldn't be a good look to have a cost of carbon in Maryland much higher than what the feds have now, but we're willing to go along with, as things change over time, to go with the change. The only reason why I was sort of supporting the dichotomy in using a 3% for carbon and something less for the social discount rate was just sort of a form of compromise to let the societal test go through that. And that I recognize it's a little bit of a dichotomy, but that was sort of a compromise. 3% for carbon, consistent with the feds now, but using a 1% real interest rate plus inflation for the overall test. And theoretically, maybe we're a little off there, but it is a compromise, and this is all judgment anyway.
Sir, what do you think about kind of what I think Joe and Dan had suggested of just inserting whatever the feds come up with.
Yeah, we were, that's why we want to stick with the 3% now, and we're willing to accept changes as they happen, as the feds come up with new numbers.
Oh, okay. All right. I got you.
And then the distinction being the Fed method versus the Fed number. And so, right, that matters. So, because the Fed number, if we use the Fed method, we could go make the change right now. We got that data is, publicly available. And so, but I think Sheldon is saying, wait till the feds change it. So if they change it in January, February, we would update. And if they don't change it until 2033, we would still use whatever they're using. Right, Sheldon?
Well, I won't be around in 2033, but
just in terms of,
hopefully, again,
policy.
It's a policy judgment. Some of the proposals, like at a 1% cost of carbon, 1% cost of carbon, we end up with a number that's 8 times the federal valuation of carbon, which I think would be a pretty hard sell in terms of having confidence in the cost effectiveness test. But I guess we could revisit that at some point if the feds don't change the number. Maybe that's something that can be discussed in the future. Nothing gets locked in forever, but for now, I think if we start with the 3% for the social cost of carbon, you get a reasonable number, and I'm still willing to have that dichotomy for the societal test. And as the feds change, we're willing to take a hard look at that and consider that and go forward.
Thank you, sir. Dylan, you had your hand up, sir.
Thank you, Your Honor. I guess I'm a little confused by sort of this idea of like, well, we can take these numbers now. We're not proposing sort of applying these to a cost effectiveness evaluation like real time. This is where we're really looking for the future. We're, as I understand it, we're primarily focused on what's going in a report in April of a recommendation to the commission. So, I'm certainly not in favor of sort of postponing consensus making if it's possible, but I don't really see why we need to kind of make a decision today and then sort of revisit it in the future. Or I guess I'm a little confused. To me, it just makes sense to wait a little bit and see. But hopefully that's not procrastination. But I guess I'm confused what Sheldon, you or I guess Joe, you said sort of, we could take the number now and then see where it goes in the future. What does that mean?
Well, what I was specifically saying is take the Fed method, which is the method they've had since 2003, and in their technical documents, I don't see any arguments where they're talking about changing that method, right? That 30-year average 10-year Treasury rate, and so if we're trying to anticipate where they're going, we go and use that method, and that gives, I think I already did the calculations. I don't remember what they are, but it was like 1.8 or something like would be the discount rate there. The only thing is they may have some sort of cap on how much they'll change, right? Maybe they'll say, we don't want to change more than a 0.5 percentage point a year or something, right? I don't know. But so, you could do something like that, or you could just say, if you really want to lean on the feds, say, we're going to use their method. If they're delinquent and not updating it for whatever reason, we're still using that method. We know how to go make those adjustments. And then you got the other option of Sheldon just saying, whatever the feds say right now, we're at 3%. If the feds go to 2% or 1.8% or 1.3% or 12%, that's what we go to, which seems reasonable to me too. Yep. So I guess my question is, why do we need to wait? In either case. The only reason I could think to wait is because we're watching to see what the bottom line numbers are. And, so then we go negotiate differently on other topics. Otherwise, let's figure out what makes rational sense to the extent we can all agree on rationality. And then,
if by inclusion in rationality, you include do whatever the feds say, I'm not sure I'm 100% on board with your definition of rationality, but I'm mostly joking. I think just to be honest, that we do I do think it's helpful to see what the bottom line number is. I don't know if that's gaming. I don't think that's gaming, because I agree with a little bit what Sheldon said, which is that we should do something. And Maryland does have to pass the straight face test in Maryland also. And I don't think we can, I think there's some consideration to just saying we're going to do whatever the feds do, whether it's a method or a number, with that much uncertainty. That's just giving us some pause. I'm not saying that OPC is not amenable to being able to settle on this.
But so if that's the case, I'm sorry, Jim, but if that's the case, then why don't we all just say what we think is a reasonable number? Because I can get you a reasonable, whatever y'all say is the reasonable number, I will give you assumptions that will give you that reasonable number. That's
right.
easy.
I'm gonna not take
you about gaming the system. Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. Mr. Gravatt, you had your hand up, sir.
Thank you, sir. Good morning, Jim Gravatt on behalf of the Maryland Energy Efficiency Advocates. And I don't have an opinion at the moment about what the right number is, but I do just want to respond to Dylan's point about, this is something for later, not today. I believe that when we were talking about the market potential study, we stressed the importance of that study using as close as possible to the cost effectiveness test that we think is going to be in place for greenhouse gas abatement. So I do think that's a reason to try to come up with at least an approximation of what we think the test should be, so that the study is meaningful.
Good point, sir. I mean, we could either try and reach some kind of consensus today, which sounds like we're not going to, or like Joe said, kind of everybody throw their numbers out as to what they believe is reasonable. And then if and when the Fed comes out, we can see if everyone's numbers are reasonable, or if everybody's on board with the Fed. I mean, but take that for what it's worth, because like Dylan said, the Fed, the federal government is what it is, and that's not a shot to anybody who has worked in the federal government. I have been part of the federal government at a time, and I'm well aware of its machinations. So, Dylan, yes, sir.
Yeah, so I at least want to, maybe if I can summarize the options that are on the table. So one that Joe said, which is we could say we're using the federal method, and we could apply that methodology with updated inputs, and Joe's capable of doing that, and we could do that now. So that's sort of option one, is use the federal method, but apply it ourselves, and not necessarily be tied to the outcome, whatever they're going to have in February or whenever it is. The second option I heard, and all of these are sort of federal referenced, but the second option would be to use whatever the Fed numbers are that they come up with. So, and that would be 3% until they change it. And if they change it to 1% or some other number, we'll use that. The third option, or a third option, would be to this is what I could use some help sort of articulating from Joe or Sheldon, which would be to use the current federal number, which is 3%, or I mean, is the feds are publishing, are the feds not publishing results at different discount rates already? So I guess that third option is to use a specific federal number, but not necessarily be tied to changes that they apply. But I may be conflating things. So it seems like those are some options. Can somebody comment on if those are the options on the table?
Sheldon and Joe, you both had your hand up, so whoever wants to jump in.
I would say just in terms of the Fed numbers, they did do sensitivities, I think, in the current studies at 2.5% and 5%. One of the things I'm struggling with, and I have to be careful because, you know, we haven't obviously, I've talked to the other utilities, but I'm going to go off a little bit on a tangent. So take this as just me and not the utilities. One issue in terms of compromising or trying to reach a settlement on the discount rate is there's another big piece that drives what people have had is the cost of the environmental things, and that's the criteria emissions. And at least there, you know, we could be a little more flexible perhaps on the discount rate, but I think using the full United States as and applying that to the criteria emissions is definitely too high. So, you know, it's hard to focus on one piece of it and reach a compromise without also addressing that other piece. Because if you use a 2% discount rate and criteria emissions applied across the United States, you're getting a 12 cents per kilowatt hour adder, which is really almost double, more than the generation price itself, and probably more than avoided generation costs without having looked at it in detail. That's a pretty big adder. And again, is that something people are comfortable with in terms of what we want is programs to be cost effective. And when we go to the commission or when the commission goes to the legislature and says these programs are cost effective, we want to really think that's the case and not just having assumptions, I'll call them heroic assumptions that might make things pass no matter what you do. And we want cost effectiveness tests that are reasonable, that the commission can have confidence in.
Thank you, sir. Joe.
So I'll address a couple things, or just clarifications for Dylan in terms of what's the landscape at this point on the discount rates. I think the utilities are proposing something that you didn't list, and that is, or currently, or is one of their possible proposals, is a 3% discount rate for societal cost of carbon and some other discount rate for everything else, right? So that would be the other one on the table. And also to point out, you know, even using we have to be clear about the federal method or the federal discount rate. And this is something that Jim and Dylan certainly should be aware, or I think are aware of. But we got the official discount rates for the feds for societal cost test for regulatory purposes and other purposes is 3% and 7%. That's the OMB directive. And so it's like I reported out in the last meeting, the DOT, the Department of Transportation, is using 7%, whereas other agencies are using 3%. And so it's kind of across the board. And so we just got to be clear about what we're talking about, right? The feds come back and say it's 2 and 5% or whatever. You know, we're referring to that lower number, or are we doing some sort of average or whatever? Okay. So I just want to flag that for people. And then I had another response for Sheldon, but then I don't remember what it was. Sorry.
All right, we'll come back to you, Joe. Dylan, and I agree. We need to, if we've got multiple percentages out there, we need to make sure we know everyone's on the same page as to what we're talking about. Yes, sir, Dylan.
Just a little bit responding to Sheldon on the criteria point, and I do agree it is worth having that part of the conversation. And in addition to the discount rate on carbon, or the overall discount rate, that did seem like the other area of fairly significant disagreement or disagreement with a substantive impact, which is that. And I can't remember all the other parties' positions, but certainly for OPC and the utilities, there's a distinction there, and OPC believes there should be a for emissions calculations, we should use a broader boundary than Maryland. So we do think that is OPC's position, and it does seem quite different, and it has a pretty big impact. So what I hear you saying, Sheldon, is, we should think about these together, because the numbers do matter to you, and the total number matters to you. And I hear that, and I think that's worth thinking about. Like maybe, Joe, you might summarize where the other parties are on that criteria emissions number or policy. I guess it's the boundary question more than a number question.
Yeah, and I sent the updated emissions benefit worksheet out moments before the meeting. So and if you go to the decision sheet, should I share this, or did everybody got it in their hands, or I can share this on the screen?
It probably wouldn't hurt if you could share it, Joe.
Okay, 1 second here. My usual clumsiness.
I think I opened the one up.
I'm going to let's see.
You muted yourself, Dylan.
Sorry, the one I have, I think is that doesn't have MEA or staff. Is that because folks haven't weighed in on these or other parties?
Yeah, I didn't get anything from OPC or staff specifically. Dan and I talk about all this stuff, so at least he and I are roughly in sync. Not always totally agreeing, though.
There weren't a ton of responses based on last week's meeting.
Okay.
I have talked to a number of people about various topics, but you know, the only additional comprehensive recommendation set was from the utilities.
Well, so Jim's protesting his being not listed as a column, so that's a lesson for you.
You mean that I wasn't well, but oh, I see. Well, no, your other Jim. Okay.
I'm not sure. I think you're still digging, Joe.
He didn't have a column. But
yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I'll apologize on Joe's behalf if you're not specifically listed in there. You don't need a column. Please feel free to respond to any and all.
Understood. I just, when I have a chance to give Joe a hard time, I like to do it.
All right. Very good.
Jim, do you have a position on the criteria emissions boundary?
This is Jim, not MEEA officially, but I don't think it should be limited to the state boundary.
I'm actually got the sheet up here. I'm just going to take notes. I'll just take notes in here. So I think you're talking, so for the criteria emissions boundary, you're saying beyond Maryland anyway. You're not saying global. Are you saying PJM or just beyond Maryland?
I'm saying beyond Maryland, at least.
At least to the Ontario border.
Yes.
Okay. So the lay of the land on the criteria emissions boundary, I don't think we've had any arguments about the global carbon boundary. So it's just criteria emissions boundary in the emissions context is the question. And we have, my recommendation was global. I think both of OPC's recommendation was global, which is really the US. And then Jim is saying beyond Maryland, at least. And then the utilities are saying Maryland. And as was pointed out, it makes a huge difference in our number. I'm going down here. I should do some sort of formatting where people can see the column heads, but here are the numbers. The only difference in these numbers, really, the fundamental difference is the discount rate between the different scenarios is the discount rate and the criteria emissions boundary. And you can see that the criteria emissions benefit per my recommendation, per OPC's recommendation, is really right around this, is about the same. And the difference here, it's a slight difference there because of the different discount rate. And you can see that the utilities proposal is much smaller. So they're proposing basically what would be $3.68 versus something on the order of $55 to $60. So 15-fold difference on the criteria emissions benefit. So that's the magnitude. If we did something in between, I believe a PJM criteria emissions benefit, and if anybody wants to go look at those scenarios, would be about 80% of 58, so that'd be about 60. So it'd be about $48, or mid 40s. if you did a PJM boundary rather than a US boundary.
So PJM is about 80% of the impact of the US.
Yeah.
I mean, pollution doesn't go that far. I mean, it sort of the nearer you are, the bigger the impact. But is that what you said, Jim?
Yeah. Yeah. And of course, we're calling it a global boundary, or at least I and OPC have called this a global boundary. It's technically not correct, because if you look at the map that I distributed in the last meeting of the emissions dispersion, you'll see all those emissions, stopping at the northern New York border, and none of them go into Toronto on that map. But we all know that that's not the case. So when we call it a global boundary, really it's a US boundary, but that's the only data we have. So.
And just so everyone knows, folks on the phone, Marin weighed in that Ceres supports a global boundary for criteria admissions.
Okay. Let's see here. I'll go up and I'll just add these individual things.
I'm wondering if any of the other if any of the other state agencies have views on this question. I don't know who's on the phone. Dan might have dropped off. I don't know if Tunde's.
I'm still here. I'm just thinking that why would we treat the emissions from the criteria differently than the emissions from carbon? I mean, it seems it spreads beyond Maryland. So, other than a much larger number than we've used in the past, I don't see why we're treating these differently.
Okay. I don't know if Sammy's on or had a position. Well, I don't know who's taking positions. It's one of those things. This is one of the weird things about this. Actually, Brent Barquette, I was talking to him the other day about all this, and he said we should run a bunch of Monte Carlo simulations. And I was like, yeah, because this kind of decision making depends on who's in the room. And but anyway, it looks like
on board with the global boundary.
It looks like most of the group, at least that are speaking up, are lean towards a global or something beyond Maryland anyway. And then the joint utilities, though, and Sheldon, that y'all's proposal was joint utility. It was all 5 of the electric utilities.
Yes.
Okay. So the utilities are at at a Maryland boundary.
Sheldon, can you how come the utilities are at a Maryland boundary versus outside of Maryland versus global?
Well, it's the programs, basically it's because the programs are paid for by Maryland customers, and we're concerned about the impact on Maryland residents. We understand carbon is really a global issue. If Maryland did everything it could under the sun for carbon reduction, but no one else did, that would be a problem. But that's not the same thing as criteria admissions. So we think, including California, we know which way the wind blows, and there's very little impact in California. So I don't know why someone wants to include the entire U.S., and it just drives up the numbers. I mean, some of the scenarios, if you look at them, there's one scenario, I think under OPC with a 1%, which I don't think they're really pushing that hard, but 1% discount rate and the global boundary for criteria, you get a 30 cents per kWh adder, which would make, you can make assumptions that make every program you can think of pass, and we don't want to go there.
The models that we're using from EPA are actually, taking that dispersion. So the emissions that are landing in California are very small, that are counted. But it's the looking at the dispersion models from power plants, wherever they are, that are generating power for Maryland. Some of those emissions, according to those models, and I can't argue with them, are landing in California. But most of it, the concentrations are certainly in the PJM, but also in New England and other places outside the PJM, but definitely outside Maryland. I mean, Maryland is a small state, so the percent of the emissions that are created as a result of Maryland's consumption that actually land in our very small state are very, are a small percentage of even the PJM total. And but let me say, because I at least try to support everybody's positions here. So to be clear, I would go global, but other states, this has been a topic where I'm not sure whether it's the majority of state. Well, probably no. I don't know that any other states are using a global criteria emissions boundary. I mean, it makes logical sense. I don't know why. I haven't seen any arguments for why they wouldn't. And I could actually see more of an argument if they went with the argument, oh, we're just going to use the state line because that's what people care about, right? Why should we pay for stuff for other people? Then my question is, well, why aren't you doing that for, CO2? But also, but that's not even what most of the states do. They go beyond their state boundary. And so, then that just like, why? What's, at least in terms of an argument, what argument do you make for doing, that kind of hybrid in between? Besides exactly what Sheldon's saying, if you do it with a global, the number blows up, right? And that number, is perceived as being too high.
Thanks, Joe. Mr. Gravatt.
Thank you, Jim Gravatt, excuse me, on behalf of the Maryland Energy Efficiency Advocates. I'm just thinking about this global question, and I'm thinking about it in terms of an analogy of clean water. I think if we, I think there's probably pretty strong precedent for regulation at the federal level. If we had a chemical plant, say, that's near a state boundary and was dumping effluent into a river, and the effect of that was that this people in the state next door, their groundwater was contaminated, but it didn't affect the people who lived in the state where that plant was based. I think probably intuitively we'd all look at it and say, well, that's a problem. They have to address that. It's not right for them to send all that to people in the state next door. And I think the criteria emissions, it's really the kind of the same thing. So when we're talking about the cost and the value of addressing those or reducing them, global does make a lot more sense to me. And if you didn't see it in the chat, Joe, I said you could put us for global.
Oh, okay.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir. All right. So this one sounds like it may be an agree to disagree.
Can I ask, Your Honor,
Please.
Sheldon, do the utilities, so this is probably a question that you'd have to just answer for yourself a little bit, but would using a PJM boundary be meaningfully more acceptable to you, or is it not a big difference?
Unfortunately, I start looking at the whole package. So again, it depends on the discount rate. It depends on maybe the PJM boundary might still be a little, if it's 80% of where we were, might be a little too much, but expanding the boundary makes sense. But when I look at the thing globally, I'm also concerned about, the next step. What are we doing for NEBs? So, if we compromise here and get a slightly higher number than we're comfortable with, NEBs are a whole other issue that just adds. Yes, I mean, it's possible, we could talk more and reach a compromise where we work on the discount rate and the boundary together.
Thank you.
Judge McClain, if everyone's okay, if we went to some of the other topics on that proposed agenda that I sent this morning, I think it would start working through that and we get a feel where maybe we could come back to this later and people might feel a little more comfortable.
Yeah, we could certainly do that, but I definitely want to go back to the discount rate with societal cost test and the cost of carbon. So I don't want to forget about that, because I'm not sure we reached any kind of consensus, weighting, using methods or bed numbers. So
right.
Go ahead, Joe. Well, let me ask you this: do you think this discussion will help us with the discount rate?
Yes.
All right.
Yeah. So what I'm hearing is that, this discount rate decision and people's willingness to agree on something and the boundary issue depends on what the overall you know, what they want. People want to see the whole package before they sign off on the elements of the package. And so I think there's some things that we can talk about that may at least give clarity on where people are at this point with respect to these other material issues, including NEBs. So I sent out an email, well, the email where I sent the new worksheet. So a couple things to highlight here. And I should have said in the joint utilities recommendation, the other great divide is the state boundary. I just forgot to put that in there. This is a rather arcane discussion that I've had with Chris Nemi. I don't know if arcane's the word, but and so I don't want to belabor it, but I did want to highlight it and make sure people are aware of it because it is material. So I was talking to Chris a couple of days ago about actually how we're dealing with RPS and our adjustment on the RPS compliance costs. And we started talking about, he said, well, remember a while ago, I proposed in the meetings that we should be using a long run marginal cost rather than a short run marginal cost, and isn't avert short run, and, you know, certainly using PJM for emissions intensities would be short run. And so we had a discussion about that. And is Chris, by the way, is Chris on the phone? Julie, you know, if Chris is, I think he wasn't going to be here till maybe another half hour or something. At any rate, and we can come back to this later, but at any rate, he proposed that we should be using a long run marginal rather than a short run marginal. I still am not totally sold on that. But I wanted to make sure people were aware of it. He showed me this. If you go to this link, in fact, I can just do it real quick. This Cambium model, you can go play around with it. And it shows, if you go and look at the load of layout, do a marginal emissions rates, you can pick a state for Maryland. And let's see, where's the state? Location, yeah. So you can go down and pick Maryland. And so this is the marginal emissions intensities for CO2. And he was saying, look, if you use a long run marginal cost, you know, over the next long period of time, you know, you're looking at maybe 350 or 300 kilograms per kilowatt hour, which is, you know, roughly, you know, 750 or something pounds. And if you look at the short run, you got a much higher number. You're looking at something on the order of 600. So his argument is, why don't you use an average emissions rate rather than a marginal, rather than these marginal rates, and that will be closer to the long run marginal, because we don't really have a good long run marginal for energy efficiency. And so again, I haven't decided that I agree with him, but I did want to flag it, because if we determined that the long run marginal is really what makes sense, this would basically move us away from, let me go back to my worksheet. Right now, I've recommended, and I think people have largely gone along with it because I've made a case for avert. We've recommended an avert historical trend, and that we use the avert emissions levels. And those were, recall, they said those were much higher than if we use PJM or Maryland Department of Environment. So they are, in fact, about 40% higher than the MDE reference case numbers. So that would, this is kind of giving you some comfort, and maybe giving the enviros less comfort, is that if we did that adjustment and used, what I would propose is just using MDE, we then use MDE's reference case. That's the starting case point, and that's the end point. Then we would have a materially lower number than we have. And actually, Christine has calculated those, so we can give you specifics on that. But for right now, I just want to flag it for you. Is there any questions? Anybody confused by what I just said? Or I know it's a lot to lay on you, but it's relevant here because people are kind of looking at the overall numbers. So I just want to show you that there is this one twist here that could significantly reduce both the GHG and the criteria emissions.
Joe, Dylan's got a question for you.
Yeah, Dylan.
Thank you, Joe. Do you or Chris have a view, or I'm not sure that this NREL calculator necessarily suggests this, what long run means? Is it necessarily 2050?
Yeah, well, I can define long run. Long run in economic terms is not really a question of time. Long run could occur in 5 minutes, right? Long run is basically a long run is all resources are variable, right? So in short run, you got a bunch of fixed generation in place. You can pick and choose from that fixed generation. You can put more fuel in one and put less fuel in another, right? That's short run. Longer run is what assets you're actually that you can actually change those assets. And we're expecting over time renewables to become a larger portion of the generation mix as things change. Now, the question for me, Dylan, here's why I can't say I agree with Chris is I don't quite understand how efficiency drives the change in generation mix. And I think that's what we need to understand. And if you look at the NREL, where did my stuff go for it? Well, I guess I must have, oh, there it is. If you look at this, it has a technology button on it. And if you click on it, you'll see it has a bunch of stuff in it, but I can't click on any of them. And none of them are energy efficiency. And so this is very much targeted to distributed energy resources, not including energy efficiency. And so I don't know how relevant it is. All I know is Chris seems pretty adamant that this is what we should be using a long run marginal. And I respect Chris, but I don't always agree with him. So I wanted to flag it because I'm still working through it myself. I got Sammy and I wanted to talk with Sammy about it. He and I have not had a chance to connect on it. Christine has similar concerns to mine. So, it's undecided, I'll say, but it could matter.
Okay. Thank you for this. I'll say that I think VEIC probably has some other folks that have views on this to share with OPC. But that would be excellent. Put in front of us.
Anybody who has thoughts on it, I totally welcome it because I will be wrestling with it. The good thing about it is to the extent that an average is is being proposed as a proxy for long run marginal. We have all the MDE numbers that we have. In fact, the reason that we were not using them is that those are all average numbers rather than marginal. And so, we have all the data. It's all even in this spreadsheet. It's an easy course correction to make. But if we decide we want to do it, okay. So I wanted to make sure everyone had that had a head up on that. Let's see. Okay, so related to that, if we did use the MDE reference and policy emissions intensities, then we would not subtract out the RPS compliance costs because that would be double counting. Because compliance costs are counted as an avoided cost, but the emissions intensities already reflect the changes in the RPS that were effective, I think, June 1 of 2021. And so we've checked, Christine went and double checked the AVERT literature last night. And the AVERT adjustment is only up to 2020. So it does not reflect some fairly significant changes in the RPS that were made in Maryland. So, so if we're using the AVERT numbers like we are right now, we should subtract the RPS compliance costs. In other words, our method is correct. However, if we went to the MDE average or MDE reference cases, then we would not subtract the RPS compliance costs, which means that the change would be not as extreme as you would expect. It would be muted as a result. At least, did people kind of get that, what I just said? Did you get that, Dylan? Or you want me to, anybody want me to? The basic point is the RPS compliance cost calculation is correct. Our numbers are, we're not, I'm not proposing a big change in method there unless we use the MDE reference or policy case for our establishing our emissions intensities, our starting point. Then we would not subtract those RPS compliance costs. That $9 that we're subtracting per megawatt hour would not be subtracted.
Yeah, I think that makes sense, Joe.
Okay. Let's see. So I was going to go to non-energy benefits unless there's a question on that particular topic. I am sorry to introduce that level of uncertainty, but Chris, laid it out to me on afternoon before last. We've pulled all our numbers together to understand how it would impact. I can actually walk people through that already. They're all in the spreadsheet. But it's, it just came up, and I try not, don't want to dismiss any good ideas and thoughtful, corrections to our methodologies, even though they're inconvenient sometimes. Let's see. So on non-energy benefits, I wasn't quite sure how to set up a discussion on this. We've got OPC, Nicole sent a document this morning. Otherwise, we've had bits and pieces over time. From what I'm seeing, I guess one question is if others, we need to wait or whatever for other proposals. Sabine sent a revised template of the NEB, a revised NEB template. So they had built on the template that I sent. And so they're, hopefully people can go through that and just, throw in your proposals at some point. Right now we have OPCs, and we have what, at least I've heard to date. Sometimes I don't hear everything. That's how I am. But to date, I've seen pretty strong arguments for reduced price volatility. And we can talk about that in particular, what I'll call bill risk. And we can, we can come back to that. The other one is health and safety. A third is outage reductions. Although I'm not sure that's still really on the table, whether people are still pushing that one. And then, of course, federal tax incentives, which I think would be counted as a non-energy benefit. And so then federal tax incentives, we get into a boundary issue. So we'll have to talk through that. If I organize this, if we go through this discussion right now, based on what information we have and what knowledge people have garnered or gathered, does that seem like a reasonable step here?
Sabine, you had a question. Yeah, go ahead, Sabine.
Yeah, I just wanted to jump in because this might kind of shape the conversation, but I do know that OPC also submitted their spreadsheet, so I want to make sure they have a chance to present on that. But following up on the health and safety conversation that we had last week, I did have a chance to discuss with Ceres and NEEP, and we kind of went through, examples from other states and how it's approached in terms of accounting for. And it is, one of the more challenging non-energy benefits in terms of quantifying, just because there aren't really readily, transferable methodologies as much so as some of the other non-energy benefits. And so what we are BPA, and I think we have some support from other stakeholders, are proposing is doing a adder to capture those harder to quantify NEBs, including health and safety, but also including, other things like productivity, asset value, power and quality, and basically not replacing any of the current NEBs that are in the test, but acknowledging that there are additional ones that are difficult to quantify and that other states basically approach by using adders. So I'll just throw out, basically, I can share some of the resources that we pulled together of what other states do, but we would propose a 10% adder, which is kind of a low to mid range in terms of what other states do, to capture, like I said, all of those NEBs that are hard to quantify and not already accounted for in the test. So I wanted to throw that out there because I know that there probably will be reactions to that from other parties, and that might shape the conversation going forward.
All right. Thank you, ma'am. Aaron.
Yeah, I think I'm going to add on to Sabine because we also discussed an equity adder when we all met together. And in the resources that Sabine is going to send around, I have cited to all of the PUC orders that add equity adders and describe why they include them. And then also 2 studies that show that low income / equity adders account for the benefits, the additional benefits that these participants receive from these programs and also that these communities receive. And so I guess just to also, so we all are starting from the same place, I think we came to 20% adder for low income benefits from these programs.
And that's on top of the 10%? Or in addition to, like, 2 separate adders?
2 separate adders, the 20% to be added to specific programs targeted towards disadvantaged or underserved communities.
All right, thanks for clarifying that. Sheldon, you.
I'm sorry, can I get just one clarification before Sheldon? Is that Aaron, or is that NEEP? Is that a NEEP proposal?
It's a NEEP, BPA, and series, and I believe maybe one other group. I'll wait and see if they weigh in.
Oh, I see. So the 20%. So Sabine is saying BPA's was 10%. You're saying 20%. So does that mean, Sabine, y'all are signed?
Oh no, it's 2 different numbers. 10% for for regular, I guess, customers. 10% non-energy benefits to encapsulate all the participant non-energy benefits. 20% for programs that are specifically designed to serve underserved or disadvantaged communities or those customers.
Okay.
Yeah, and just to clarify quickly, Joe, so we do support both numbers, so 10 being for the non-low income and then 20% being for the low income. Thanks for that question.
Mr. Gravatt.
Thank you, Jim Gravatt on behalf of the Maryland Energy Efficiency Advocates, and I just wanted to say we also support the 10 and 20% adder values.
All right. Thank you, sir. Sheldon?
Thank you.
Sheldon, you there, sir?
Yeah, I'm back now. I muted myself. The one clarification I wanted is the 20% would only apply to low income programs.
Yes, sir. That's how I understood it.
Yeah, and that's an important. And then we need more discussion on the 10% adder. But where would you? What would you apply the 10% to? The full avoided cost? That's a question for Sabine. What 10% of what is the question?
So I believe it's 10% applied to the percentage of benefits, so added on to the total benefits for looking at residential programs in particular. But I would welcome others' comments who have more kind of experience and familiarity with how those numbers are applied in other states, because that's where it's derived from, is looking at a range of what other states add.
All right. Jim's hand shot up immediately, so you want to weigh in there, sir?
Thanks. Jim Gravatt on behalf of the Energy Advocates. And Sheldon, I think that's an interesting question because, following on the conversation we just had about 1% or 3% discount rate and how that affects the total avoided cost. So I do think it matters what we decide on the avoided cost. I think the 10 and 20% can be thought of, or at least how I think of them, is premised on the idea that in the conventional system that we have now, with the sort of the conventional avoided costs that we have, they would be applied to the full avoided costs. I think if our avoided costs end up being triple what they are now, then the 10 and 20%, maybe those should be adjusted. And I'll refer to something, a case in Colorado 4 years ago, the strategic issues proceeding public service company litigated with the commission there. And a case was made, which my client at the time in that case supported, that as the net benefits were decreasing because baselines were going up, the non-energy benefit adders should increase because those values weren't changing. But right, I mean, the health benefit kind of stays the same whether the net benefit is this much or this much. but because it's determined as on a multiplier or adder basis, there needs to be some sense of what the starting value is. Did that make sense? Was that a complete thought? Could anyone tell?
Well, I would make a distinction, or I guess I would need a little more clarity here. So if we were multiplying it, so for example, the price volatility numbers, I've seen 10%. In fact, talking to Brendan Batts, he wrote the ACEEE report. If he was applying a number based on his research, he would use a 10% adder, but that would be applied to the avoided energy cost. And so when you say avoided costs, it could be avoided energy cost. It could be you take, which is on a per megawatt hour basis. It could be the avoided capacity cost, which is on a megawatt day basis or something, right? And so, or it could be applied to the overall benefits. So you take all the other benefits, right, and then multiply by 10%. So I think, I think Sheldon's question for us to actually do the analysis, we do need to get clarity on what that is, and it largely depends on what's in that 10% adder, right? What's like for example, we have a 2% adder for low income for the financial arrearage financing costs for utilities, and that's applied on a per kilowatt hour basis because the it's assumed to be comparable to the dollar savings, and that's the relationship from which the 2% number was derived, right? So it's all we have our comfort benefit is per home with a Shell retrofit or HVAC improvement, right? So it's very specific in that case. We have a light, our lighting O&M benefit is per lamp. So yeah, it's a question we definitely need to answer if y'all don't already have a position on it.
All right, thank you, sir. We got a couple hands up. Let's see, we got Nicole, Sheldon, and then Mr. Hurley.
Good morning, Your Honor. Good morning, everyone. OPC does support a 10% adder for health and safety for the non-low-income programs. We like the 20% number for low-income programs. We're just we still want to contemplate a little bit more whether we kind of think that adder is necessary because they're not subject to cost effectiveness testing. But I guess I would withhold our position on that, but I think the 20% number is reasonable. It's just we're still kind of talking about whether we need that, but we do agree with the 10% for the non-low income programs. And I guess the conversation is continuing as to exactly what is included in that percentage. Thank you.
All right, thank you, ma'am. Sheldon?
Yeah. Let's see. I just want to say that I can only speak for myself at this point and not the other utilities. The 10% may be a reasonable number that we could go with. I would have to check with the other utilities, but I would say that it should only be applied to the total benefits in the TRC test, excluding the other non-energy benefits. So in other words, 10% should be applied to like avoided energy, avoided capacity. More to think about, maybe not to DRIPE, which is a price effect. But I wouldn't apply the 10% adder for health and benefits to the other non-energy benefits we have in the TRC. And I wouldn't necessarily apply that 10% adder to the societal test, which would increase, again, the cost of carbon, the cost of criteria emissions. But just thinking out loud, I think that 10% could be applied to most of the benefits in the TRC, but not everything.
All right, Dan and then Dylan.
Yes. So I guess a clarifying question for me is this 10% for the NEBs that we don't already have a formula for, or is it 10% of all NEBs? So like we talked about, we've had some non-energy benefits in the other tests that we've used over the last several years. So is this in addition to, is this solely for the, let's say, quote, unknown benefits, how to calculate the benefits that we're not sure of how to calculate? Or is it for every NEB?
Thanks, Dan. And Jim weighed in the chat that he agreed that the adder should not apply to other NEBs. All right, Dylan and then Sabine.
I think Sabine should answer that question first, and then I'll make a comment.
Okay, thanks. Yeah, I just didn't want to jump in. Thanks, Dan, for the question. So the proposal is for it to be just capturing the ones that aren't currently in the test. So leaving the ones that are in the test now as is, and focusing on the ones that have been harder to quantify.
I didn't see the chat comment from Jim, but I may be. Okay, yes. I think we could do a little bit of follow up on how some of the other states are, what they're applying these adders to. This question. My expectation is that it's close to, most typically close to what Sheldon is proposing, that it's applied to to some of those TRC sort of energy benefits. So that's subject to, we can do a little bit more follow up. But I'm not sort of expressing how it should be done, but in terms of how other states do it, which was an important reference point, Aaron could speak to this. I think it's more typical to apply those to the resource energy savings types of TRC resources.
All right, thank you, sir.
So Dylan, if you're, I'm sorry.
No, you're good, sir.
If you're going out looking to answer those questions, maybe, well, we could talk about some specifics that we would need to have. You got whether numbers are whether your benefit, whatever that benefits, right? If you're combining avoided energy cost and the simplest, let's say, would be to apply it to avoided energy cost, right? Then you can apply it on a kilowatt hour basis, right? And it gets treated as a % of that. However, that gets discounted or whatever, it gets discounted. If you do, if it's on all of the energy resource, that being avoided energy and avoided capacity costs, then it's a little more complicated. Then presumably you would do a dollar stream of savings over time, and then you discount that, and then you would apply 10%. You would take 10% of that, right? If it's applied to something broader than that, you know, that somebody needs to tell us what the formula, or if it's applied on, yeah, in this case, it's not applied to per home or anything. But the question I think Sheldon, that you also want to check on is a lot of the jurisdictions that you're talking about are going to have a DRIPE benefit. And so is that DRIPE benefit included? Is a TND benefit included? I think those are the big ones. So I was just throwing out Dylan or whoever's going to dig around on that. Just wanted to give you an idea of kind of the level of detail that we need to actually apply it.
Right. I mean, it it summarized, Joe. It's which benefit streams are is the adder being applied to.
That's right, and it could be on a kWh or it could be dollar, but it needs to do, you know, clearly it needs to be. I think you need to decide whether it's discounted or not. You know, that kind of stuff. So,
yeah. Okay. I mean, I think it needs to be on a dollar basis, unless you were only measuring kilowatt hours. I mean, this should apply to gas savings too, right? So I think it almost certainly needs to be on a dollar basis mechanically, but still the question remains on what which benefits should it be applied to.
Yeah. By the way, somebody's asking me whether I'm intending to share my screen, and I actually was, because I'm writing notes as I hear them in here. And so actually I just deleted something. So anyway, I can stop sharing my screen if y'all prefer, but that's why I was leaving it up here, because I'm in my email just writing some things that I'm hearing from people.
Yeah, if you want to stop sharing your screen, that's fine, but please don't stop taking notes, because It's going to help Judge Berger.
I'm just going to right now. I don't, I have no secrets. I have no secrets in my life. So I'm just going to keep it up here and then because we'll probably want to look at something else in a minute.
Okay, that's fine. Whatever works. All right. Sheldon, you had your hand up, sir.
Yeah, I just wanted to clarify. Joe, one thing you said, I guess I would apply it to T&D as well, just not DRIPE because DRIPE is a price effect. But Dylan will rely on you to take a look at how that should be applied. The other thing I was thinking about, and just a little caution with the 10% adder for health and health benefits, is that, and this goes back to criteria emissions. If you value criteria emissions, why do you value NOx and SOx reductions? Because that has a health impact. So you have to think about, if we get a real high number for criteria emissions, are we double counting the health and the health benefits with this adder? So just a thought. I mean, there are other health benefits like, avoiding cold and things like that, but the big one is the criteria emissions, I believe, from air pollution.
Yeah, I'm going to, by the way, going to complicate things further at some point. I'm just letting people throw out proposals so we have them on the table.
All right. Erin, you had your hand up, ma'am.
Oh, yes. I think I just wanted to also clarify that I think the way we view the non-energy benefits adder is a participant adder. And I believe we consider NOx emissions societal impacts of the test. And I think we were drawing that distinction in the discussion.
That help you at all, Sheldon?
Could you say that again? I got distracted for a second by a text message from my mother-in-law, but that's
no problem. Yes. No, I was just saying to kind of frame your thinking with whether we need to adjust the 10% for the avoided. I can't think of the criteria emissions, I believe is what we're calling them. It's the NEBS adder that we proposed at 10% is looking at participant benefits. And I believe when we look at air emissions, especially from programs, those are more societal benefits. So these are just benefits that will directly be conferred to the participant.
No, that was helpful. And I think, I just need to think about that a little more. But yeah, I understand that. Thank you.
Can I restate what I heard in terms of a proposal? And if y'all wouldn't mind writing it down and sending it just so we have that record, I think. But I'm hearing, I'm hearing a recommendation for a consolidated 10% participant adder that would be applied to all programs. And that would be residential. Is that residential and commercial?
Erin, Sabine, this is your proposal.
Yes. I'm going to say yes for now.
Very good.
We were making this up on the fly. We discussed this and we're ironing out the details as we discuss it here. So I will say yes for now. And also I think I might follow up. I don't know if Dylan already said this, but if you guys could add the questions that you have for the adders that we proposed, maybe in like a document, Joe, like you're taking notes, we can make sure to answer them in more detail.
How about if you send me your proposal and then I can do that? That would be yep. I can talk to Dylan or whoever to help figure out what those questions are.
I mean, I think it would be great, Erin, if you could take the lead on this. I think it's possible the EIC could provide some support or some resources or references to help you. But I think you actually have pretty good sense of this. As you included all those orders, so those are the kinds of documents that we kind of want to look through to see how they're calculating it in some other places. So I think you should try to take the lead, and we can help fill in and support with some.
Sounds good.
And I'm happy to send out what I'm writing down to you. I'm not being cagey or anything like that, but I just don't want to. I don't want to own it yet. I don't ever want to own it. It's somebody else's proposal. So we got a consolidated 10% participant adder for all residential and commercial programs. So that's only, when I'm hearing that, that's a 10% participant adder. So that means only participant benefits. That would be 10% of participant benefits. That's a little, I think a little different than we were talking about. So that may need some clarification. Do you understand why? One, participant benefits well, it depends on the test, right? Participant benefits can be the retail reduction price, the retail, their bill reductions. Even in a total resource cost test, we're talking avoided energy and capacity costs, but the participants have benefits when a rebate, when a utility pays a rebate to a participant, that's a transfer. In fact, that doesn't even count against that's not an economic cost. It's somebody handed money to somebody else. There are equity issues, and the person who had to hand the money over may not like it, but there's no economic cost incurred, and that's what a total resource cost and the societal cost tests are trying to measure. So on the participant benefits could be positive or conceivably negative for some programs. So it could include the rebate. If the utility gives the participant rebates, is this 10% include that rebate that the participant receives? So that'll be a question we'll have to, or we need some clarification on. There's also a participant are we talking net participant benefits? In other words, not in the net to gross sense, but net participant benefits in the sense that the customer gets $100 of rebate, they spend $75 on the measure, so they got $25 of net benefit. Not counting the avoided cost. Does that, is that what we're counting? So as soon as you say participant, I get a little bit, at least in the TRC context, in the societal cost test, we'll have to get some clarity on that.
All right, Joe, let me jump in real quick. Marin, you had your hand up, ma'am?
Yes, hi, thank you, Your Honor. This is Marin Mahoney on behalf of Ceres. I had a quick question. Joe, your questions are really obviously we're going to go back and look at those. My question to you is, how is the comfort benefit applied currently?
Yeah,
that might help inform us.
Yeah, so the comfort benefit is applied only to homes that have a building shell improvements. So they're coming out of the home performance program or the limited income program. Or there's also an adder for early replacement of HVAC in homes. And so, so those are both provided on a per home basis, participant basis. And it's provided every year, right? So for comfort, I think it's $168 or something like that per home. So a participant in a home performance program, when we calculate these different cost effectiveness, we include that $168 per home per year for a comfort benefit. So that's how we do it for comfort. For our O&M benefit, which is another big one, that's a very big one for lighting. It's all lighting. That's done on a per lamp basis. So we have calculated for all the different types of lamps in the Empower portfolio, what that benefit would work out to. And that's basically saying, as a result of having this, buying an LED that's going to last, 10 years, you are no longer going to have to buy incandescents that only last 1 year. Therefore, you avoid 12 incandescent purchases, and that's a benefit that's counted in.
Okay.
Right, and so it's a big question, right? Are those both of those are benefits? Is this 10% on top of that, or is it just on top of that? The simplest way to do it would be to just, and I suspect this is what the other jurisdictions are doing, it is just saying it's a 10% of avoided energy costs. That's simple, right? And that would be a point. Our avoided energy cost, I think, are 9 cents. Sheldon, do you know? I remember offhand. I think it's around 9 cents or something per kilowatt hour. So that'd be a 0.9 cent per kilowatt hour adder in that case. And by the way, I can give you those numbers.
That sounds about right.
I can give you those numbers in a second, but I just have to go leave my screen. So if you just I can help you all work through this and figure out what those questions are and what we would need to do to firm that up outside the meeting. If y'all just send me a note with your proposal, I'll take some time to think it through maybe talk to people and we can get a group discussion going on that, you know, outside of the 160 people in the working group.
Sounds like a plan. Oh, go ahead,
Okay,
John.
so, and I won't even since we got a lot of questions and open-ended stuff, I don't even think I need to summarize, you know, what I've heard here.
Agreed.
I do hear support from for the 10% or something along these lines from OPC, MIA, the advocates, efficiency advocates, NEEP, BPA. Were others wanting to be on this list for a record? And I heard Sheldon say maybe the utilities can support it.
Yeah, Sheldon Gas and Electric was it was a maybe.
Yeah,
depending on how it's calculated. And OPC seemed to be in series. Obviously, they're in support of it, and OPC might support the 20% for the LMI, but obviously we'd have to more information as to 20% of what, how it's going to be calculated, etc.
Okay. Okay, good. Nobody's relying on me for notes. That's a good thing, sounds like. So the 20% additional, so NEEP and MIA, I heard supporting it. OPC, maybe that's it on that one.
NEEP, MIA, series, and BPA.
Oh, okay.
But yeah, I include all the, when you say NEEP or series, I just assume it's all three of them, but and MEEA is also on board as well.
Got you. I'm trying not to overgeneralize.
That's all right. Oh, Brian, you had your hand up, sir.
Yeah, I was just going to say that I think we're probably similar to where OPC is. I think we're generally aligned, but would need to look more at some of the percentage pieces.
Sounds good, sir. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. To the extent that everybody just negotiates a NEBS, then, you know, we don't have to discuss individual components of it. And so maybe people don't want to discuss individual components of it. I know that these 10% adders include a number of things which I personally, well, I don't know if it's professionally or whatever, don't really, I don't subscribe to personally. And so I don't know, Judge McLean, to what extent we want to get into those elements. Maybe it doesn't matter, you know, what, you know, the ins and outs of the various components. Maybe all that matters is if everybody signs on to it, the overall number. Does that make sense what I'm saying? Right, because I've heard. Okay.
It's assuming everybody's on board with how that number's arrived at and what it's a number of and how it's applied. Yeah, I'm fine with that.
Yeah, and I don't. From what I'm hearing, is there's not really. I'm not hearing. Sabine, maybe I'm mishearing. That you know, this is not an analysis that's been done that got the advocates to arrive at a 10%. It's largely drawn from other jurisdictions, what some other jurisdictions are doing.
That's how I understood it as well.
Okay.
Dylan and or Sabine, you want to jump in there? And then Dylan?
Yeah, sure. Just to answer that quickly. Yeah, I would just say that it also kind of takes the universe of impacts that, you know, the National Standard Practice Manual has gathered as evidence from other states of what could be included in a jurisdiction-specific test, and then comparing what's already included in Maryland's testing practices. We kind of looked at, okay, how are states accounting for the ones that aren't included currently? And so from that, we did kind of an analysis of what those adders are capturing, but obviously not a, you know, benefit by benefit analysis, if that makes sense.
And I would be remiss if I didn't point out a few things, though, or just, you know, offer up a few things. One is I heard you mention property valuation, and I think, unless I misheard, I have big concerns about that as double counting. To the extent that the property valuation is driven by changes in energy consumption, in other words, the home becomes more efficient, therefore it becomes more desirable, or the valuation is resulting from increased comfort, we already have that benefit. So my concern with any adder that includes or that is pointing to a property valuation component, that there's a bunch of double counting going on there, given that we're at least have been trying to capture those things. So just that's one caution, or something people might want to think about, right? We don't want to be, I don't think anybody on this call wants to be double counting benefits or costs. The other on the reduced price volatility, which I think with which Nicole had sent a couple documents related to that, including the ACEEE Brendan Batts report, which I was familiar with, and the New England Avoided Cost Study, which I frankly don't understand. I'm just not smart enough to understand what they're saying. But the and I've read it 3 times. But the on the price volatility, there's all of this price volatility discussion is around bill risk. It's people's willingness to pay to have certainty about their bills, that they're in particular, they don't want price shock later if the cost, if their price per kilowatt hour goes up in the future. And so they can kind of, at least for the amount of energy that they save, they've in effect locked in their dollar per kilowatt hour price. And so there is a reduction in risk, a reduction in, it's just like, it's analogous to a financial asset. If I have one asset that gives me a 6% return and another asset that gives me a 6% return, they look identical. But if one is very risky, has a high VAR in financial terms, then it is less, generally, most people are willing to pay less for that highly uncertain 6% return than they are for a certain 6% return. So I agree that there is a value there. And from talking to, I talked to Brendan on Friday night, and his thinking based on his research, and he's done a lot more of it than I have on this topic, is that about a 10% of avoided energy cost would be an appropriate adder for this one. However, my challenge for everyone is that if we're talking about bill risk, I'm not sure why we're not talking about investment risk also. I'm maybe from the old days or something. I don't know whether the literature still talks a lot about the efficiency gap, but I think that's why we do programs, is because we think people should be taking all these actions, and they're not. And why not? Because they lack information, or because they have misperceptions of things, or because there's a landlord-tenant conflict. There's all these reasons that we do these programs. And they're all about these different these barriers. And you go look at those barriers and look at that literature, there's a cost to those barriers that we're not talking about here. We're not talking about transaction costs associated with people trying to decide whether they're going to buy a high efficiency or low efficiency refrigerator. We're not talking about the investment risk associated with, my, very high efficiency condensing furnace that I bought 8 years ago, expecting it to last, 12 years, and it's broken. And I'm, buying mini split heat pumps to replace it. Right. And so there's a performance risk associated with energy efficiency. There's a financial risk associated with it that we're not, which I'm lumping into investment risk, which which it's just curious to me why that's not coming up in the context. And so I would think if we're talking price volatility risk, this bill risk, that we should be netting out somehow this investment risk component, or I would like to hear why we wouldn't want to do that. And I have attachment to my email, a link on an NREL report. NREL is generally, very much in the advocate realm, talking about transaction cost and economic risks associated with projects. This is not something Joe Loper's making up. There's a lot of other literature on this, for decades, but this is reasonably recent, and NREL is a heavy hitter in the area and is considered, probably credible by most of us here.
Joe, let me jump in here. I got a couple hands up. Dylan and then Chris.
Thank you, Your Honor. A couple of things in there, and I assume this is sort of starting to transition possibly to that risk factor, and OPC has proposed that be included, and we see that as really more at the utility system level than a participant. I sort of take your point a little to some degree about sort of bill risk, but I think it's generally seen more frequently at the sort of system as a system benefit. To the question of, what what about the risks of efficiency? First, I think those should be estimated and counted separately, and I don't think those are good arguments for not including that benefit. Not that that's necessarily what you're saying, but I guess specifically to some of the risks that you've included, such as performance risk and measure life risk, I feel like those are better accounted for, and I think are to some degree accounted for in how you estimate the average measure life. You have an estimate of how long measures are going to last, and it's my presumption that that's data that reflects the fact that some of them are going to break early, some of them are going to last longer, and that's already in fact accounted for. Now, some of the really specific risks that you're talking about, I think are just too secondary or tertiary to really get your head around. And certainly in terms of efficiency, performance risk, and the cost of having invested in a piece of equipment that may not function the way you want it to, yeah, of course, that's the thing. I think that we're already accounting for that. So some quick thoughts on that. The other thing I was going to say on the participant non-energy benefit. So we're not the sort of quote sponsor of this proposal, but it would be my view that a 10% adder would be justified simply based on the health and safety and kind of wellness related benefits. And even if you said, and I actually think it would be quite important to say at the end of the day, these are the benefit categories that we are encompassing. I think Sabine has said all of these except for water savings and comfort, because we already have those. That maybe isn't exactly how I would do it, but I think that the number would be justified even if you excluded health and safety, even if it was really primarily based on health and safety and wellness. You could take out the asset value. I actually think could be calculated separately. Reduced utility bills. I think it's important to say whether those or not are included, but I think the number of 10% would be justified even if they weren't. Thanks.
Thank you, sir. Chris?
Thanks. And a little bit of an echo. My apologies for not being able to join earlier. I wanted to quickly respond to what Joe said about transaction costs and risks on the efficiency side of the equation. I think the issue of risk on efficiency, as Dylan started to suggest, is complicated. To some extent, the risk of uncertain performance for new technology that's efficient is also captured in the incremental costs that contractors build into the prices for selling those products and services to customers. If they're worried about more frequent callbacks, the price that they charge will be reflective of that, and presumably that's included in the incremental cost assumptions that we're already using for measures. That said, well, actually, before I go to the transaction costs, I'll also say that this 10% price volatility risk is just one aspect of the risk mitigating benefits of efficiency. Joe and I have talked a little bit about this, but there are other aspects like utilities commonly overestimating demand growth on the T&D system because their number one job is to keep the lights on. And I gave this example to Joe recently. When Con Ed in New York did geo-targeting projects, non-wire solutions, on 20 or 30 of their substations about 10 years ago. They found that even though they thought they were just deferring the capital upgrades, in about a third of the cases, they discovered that they actually never needed the upgrades at all. And what the geo-targeting of efficiency did was buy them enough time to recalibrate their load forecasts. That's another aspect of risk mitigating benefit of efficiency. Now, I do want to come back to transaction costs, because I think Joe is right that there are transaction costs that customers incur for some efficiency measures. Not all. If we're talking about rebates for appliances or air conditioners or heat pumps, they're in the market to buy one anyway. The transaction cost of buying a more efficient ones probably aren't any different than they are for the standard product. But if we want to go renovate a house or insulate a commercial building or do a major lighting retrofit project in an office, there are transaction costs. They're not easy to quantify. And the question is, how do those added costs on the efficiency side of the equation compare to the other risk mitigating benefits of efficiency that aren't included in that 10% number? I don't know what the answer to that question is, but I just want to make the point that some of those extra costs are potentially also offset by, and maybe more than offset, who knows, by other risk mitigating benefits of efficiency as well.
All right, thank you, sir. All
right. I could try to respond to a few of those things, but without belaboring it. You know, I don't need to. I don't need. Well, solely, I don't want to be the sole debater of one position. You know, if everybody's on board with something, then I'm not going to stop it. One on the EUL, I will just say our EULs are based on an RLW study from 2007. That's probably most of them. I don't know how many condensing furnaces, you know, were out there back then, but certainly they weren't. There were some functional differences, and a lot of other technologies as well. And so there's certainly in terms of uncertainty. There's a heck of a lot of uncertainty with those numbers. And that's what we're talking about here, right? We're not talking about whether the number's higher or lower. We're talking about uncertainty. And so for a buyer of an energy efficient product, LEDs, we argue about that. People are starting to wonder whether we need to go revise. We're assuming 20,000 hours. EPA assumes 20,000 hours. And, there's serious talk amongst evaluators about whether we need to go revisit those numbers, given some things that we're seeing. When you go out and install a control system, we have a whole retro commissioning program, and retro commissioning has been a big deal, for at least since the mid 90s or something, and that's all about going and fixing problems with all these different operational issues, and those are costs. That's a transaction cost in terms of an O&M cost that is doesn't get captured. And I'm not and in terms of the Con Ed discussion, so in that case you're saying that they actually realized that they could avoid load, and they otherwise would have built generation or whatever, and by giving them more time than they were unable to, that worked out well. But it can go the other way too. And so the risk is still, I don't quite understand how that's really a reduction in risk. That's just saying it worked out, just like most of the time when Southwest back in the 90s was buying fuel, 5 years in advance, most of the time it worked out for them, but at some point it didn't. So and anyway, I just my complaint here is not necessarily that the benefits y'all are proposing are not legitimate. In fact, some of them I think are totally legitimate. It's just that there's it always it bothers me just I guess, intellectually when I'm not seeing people propose what are, things that are on the other side of the ledger, that I have to propose them and then look like I'm kind of the naysayer for the programs or something, which hopefully people know I'm not. So on the transaction cost, and I totally agree with everybody. These are hard to get at, but that's the whole point of y'all doing a 10% ad, proposing a 10% adder, because the things that are within that adder are hard to estimate. And so I don't really understand that, that argument in this context. I'll shut up. Hey, Dylan.
All right, thanks, Joe. Dylan.
So again, and this is maybe less for Joe than for Sabine and company. I think it's worth a look back at that list and see if in sort of updating the proposal on the mechanical side, as we've talked about already, but also maybe on sort of getting a little bit more precise about which of these we're seeing as part of that could be helpful. Joe, I also don't want to sort of belabor this, but I mean, two things. If you think that EULs are wrong and outdated, then we should update those. And that's not a good justification for excluding a risk on the wholesale supply side that we can identify. I think OPC has proposed a couple of things that go both ways. So just to be, not to be defensive, but to defend it a little bit. We've proposed adding costs on the cost side of the cost effectiveness test, specifically the utility earnings for Empower. And I don't know when we're going to talk about those because they're not, quote, a non-energy benefit, but this is a key part of the cost effectiveness test. We've also proposed, and I also don't know if this is on the agenda for today, other greenhouse gas sources, including refrigerants, and actually those could easily go both ways. So we've got heat pumps and other equipment that's going in, which has refrigerants that the outgoing gas or whatever equipment didn't have. And if there's information that those create leak risks of high greenhouse gas refrigerants, we want to count those. So I think we are trying to be improving the test, both by measuring some potential costs that we're not measuring now, as well as some of the benefits. I do think it really is very broadly understood that demand side resources are undervalued in systems and decision making compared to supply side. And so I think we need, there is an important sort of balance and symmetry philosophy. I think we need to be a little bit cautious about whether the sum total of that sort of diligence results in continued undervalue of demand side resources. But my larger point is that I think we're interested in both sides of the ledger and have proposed at least 2 changes to the test that would potentially or potentially add to the cost side. Thank you, Aaron. And just on the process point, I do hope either today or soon, some of the things that they're in the thing that Nicole sent around the template, both the other GHG sources and the cost of utility earnings as a factor. I hope we can get to those at some point.
Yeah, so I wasn't intending to cast aspersions on everybody generally about this process. It was in the context of non-energy benefits. It feels like they all go one way, and it seems like a lot of my career I've spent trying to deal with situations where they went the other way. They weren't non-energy benefits. They were unknown or unknowable costs associated that we were trying to overcome. And so that's where I wish it would at least comfort me, right? If I saw a 10%, adder that had underneath it, okay, we took these costs associated with this type of risk, but then there's also this other risk that increases, and we netted that out, and then we have a transaction cost added in there, and we take these health impacts, but we recognize these health impacts only apply in these certain situations, and then all that I love it, right?
Yeah,
that's
I hear you.
But that sometimes in these conversations around non-energy benefits, that's not the nature of the conversation, or it doesn't feel like that's the conversation we're having.
Sheldon, you want to jump in, sir?
Yeah, I just have a couple questions for Dylan on some of the OPC proposals. For the utility profits, which is really a cash transaction, so to speak, would that just go in the RIM test, not the TRC? It's not a resource cost? And
wait, Sheldon, we didn't propose anything about utility profits. I don't know if you're just using that term.
No. I thought you said the surcharge.
Surcharge return.
I thought you wanted a 10% adder on their profit, Dylan.
It's not on profit. It's the cost that ratepayers are paying on the balance. That's not the same as profit, I don't think.
Okay, but in any case, are you just proposing that for the RIM test? It's not a resource cost? Same thing with the federal incentives. So does that go to just the participant test and not TRC? Just something to think about. They don't seem to be resource costs to me. More cash flows.
Well, so certainly on the tax incentive, we really didn't focus on the TRC because we've just not been focusing on the TRC. So I'll have to come back to those. We definitely think that the tax incentive should apply to the societal, the primary test, and their cash flows if you use a national boundary, then their cash flows. If you use a state boundary as OPC's proposed for this kind of economic factor, then they're neither resource, they're not a resource in the traditional sense, but they are an actual benefit that's coming to the state. So we do want to apply that. I can take a look back again at which tests we're proposing for the cost of the paying down or paying for the unamortized balance. I don't know that would be limited to the RIM test, but I can follow up on that and be more specific.
Just questions for now.
Yeah, thank you.
Either.
Thank you. Anybody else? Joe, come back to you. On your agenda for the day, is there something else you wanted to hit, or?
Yeah, I think I wanted to get a little clarity on the health and safety. Again, I kind of need more detail on the 10% and what all's included in there, and then also in the 20% for limited income.
Right. I think that's going to come probably at a later meeting.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. But in terms of other things you wanted to cover, what else is on your agenda? Or should we, is it worth circling back to the discount rates?
Let me hit a couple things first. And the main reason I would like to hit them is just so people understand that some of the details that I would find useful for at least, establishing what my position would be on some of these things. And so on the health and safety benefit, which I hear is a big one that's being still considered either in the consolidated adder or elsewhere. I think, Chris, unless I misunderstood, you were agreeing with me last week that this is very context specific. Some programs, a health and safety benefit could make sense, but in some cases it's not, especially if you have a criteria emissions benefit, which is already dealing with your ambient air conditions. So really health and safety is related to indoor air quality primarily. And this is one that's always challenging for me because I've been in this stuff since the early 90s, and indoor air quality was all the rage, at EPA in the old days. And it was concerns about indoor air quality. We're tightening up homes and people are getting sick. And therefore you had ash rate, now you have ash rate, rules as the last 5 or 6 years, saying you got to put so much ventilation in to make sure that doesn't happen. So my only concern is we don't want to be creating a problem, fixing the problem, and then claiming the benefit of that. And so that's my only issue with the health and safety. Otherwise, I'm totally down with it. Otherwise.
Go ahead, Chris.
Yeah, Joe, I completely agree on 2 points I think you just made. The first is that I do think this is very program specific. There really aren't health and safety benefits with LED light bulbs. They are much more commonly associated with whole building retrofits, especially residential ones, where you can find indoor air quality problems and fix them, like cracked heat exchangers that are leaking carbon monoxide into the living space, backdrafting of appliances, those kinds of things. And your second point, that you shouldn't get credit for fixing indoor air quality issues that other aspects of your program may be creating, it seems like a no-brainer. I haven't personally seen any evidence that suggests tightening up buildings at the levels that we typically tighten them up is creating a real kind of indoor air quality concern. But to the extent it did, and there's no mechanical ventilation that goes with it, then that should be considered for sure.
Thank you, sir. Jim, you have a question, sir, or a comment?
A comment, an observation. Thank you, Jim Cravat, on behalf of the Energy Efficiency Advocates. And I just want to say, I've done hundreds of residential energy audits. I've supervised hundreds of retrofit jobs. And it is possible to create indoor air quality concerns by tightening up a house. But an awful lot of houses have indoor air quality problems before you do anything. And I think it's much more common in my experience that those kinds of issues, mold and moisture from inadequate ventilation, that those things are addressed as part of a retrofit than it is common that they are created. But point taken, they can be created. A lot of times they're there anyway.
Thank you, sir. Appreciate that.
Yeah, and I will clarify, Jim, if that's the case, right? Where that's the case, that I'm all in on the benefit. But I have, but I've seen numerous instances, or at least verbiage in reports and stuff that seems to be trying to take credit for other things. So,
Dan, did you want to jump in?
Yeah, just currently speaking on the indoor air quality. So our programs as they are now, they're required to address the ventilation when they're tightening the building. So is that really an issue within our program at this time? So I don't know if that's, I understand the issue, but if our programs are being run correctly, then they shouldn't be creating indoor air quality issues. At least I don't think they should, based on the ventilation requirements now. I know back in the 90s there were some issues there, and I know we had a couple instances with some instances on our programs early on that might have caused some, maybe not indoor air quality, but there was just some other issues with that. But I think those are addressed now, so I don't know if that's really an issue anymore, but I guess just try to get an opinion on that from folks.
Dan, my opinion is that they are not creating those problems on when they leave, by the time they leave, right? That if, to the extent that the problems are created in the course of a project, that they are remediated by the end of the project. So I agree with you. This is not, my criticism is not of the program. I'm challenging the way that some that I've seen of these health benefits are calculated.
Okay, Dylan.
Yeah, I just want to say that I obviously can't rule out, and I think this is what Jim is saying, Joe, that happens sometimes. It is inconceivable to me that that is a net effect of home performance projects. The number of instances and ways in which home performance projects improve indoor air quality from when they leave compared to when they arrive is that evidence is very strong. And I think there's enormous variation. And I want to just point out that this kind of non-energy benefit adders, they don't only reflect that things are hard to quantify. They also reflect considerable variation and wanting to avoid some false precision. But I think it's the evidence that home performance, and I think Sabine had to step off, or I'm sure she would be taking this. The evidence that home performance project improvements are having a net impact is very strong. And I think the question of which programs it should apply to is worth a little bit more conversation. I was this morning wondering about whether the appliance recycling program, creates non-energy benefits that we want to account for or not. They would be obviously very different from indoor air quality. Maybe there are others. What's the benefit of freeing up that space in the garage that old chest freezer was taking up? I don't know. That we
$75.
Well, or just in seriously for the recycling programs, you have an appropriate, correct disposal of refrigerants.
Yes, right.
It's a huge benefit, right?
Yeah. Well, that is something I think we should actually try and measure, because I do think refrigeration is just going to be an increasing thing, and it's important, and there's metrics out there, so we should try and measure that separately. Actually, I'm not sure that we should apply this to the appliance recycling program, but I actually think we should think carefully before we limit it to only home performance or HVAC. But those are the most obvious, programs.
So, Dylan, I heard you say that there are clear studies, or there are clear evidence, of these health impacts, and I guess I would ask y'all to forward your clearest studies, and ideally that they would be done by people who are not running programs.
Yeah, and I'm gonna follow up and with Sabine. I think she had to step off for lunch, but because they're really the people to provide some of that. But I will take that as a to do.
Chris, you had your hand up, sir.
Yeah, just two things. First, to echo what Dylan and Jim said, that on average, residential building retrofit programs that are well designed, there's ample evidence, and I'm glad Dylan's going to pull it together, that the net effect is improvements in health and safety. The second point is, I want to caution about refrigerator recycling non-energy impacts. There may be some of the impacts you guys are talking about, but in that case, there's also one that goes in the other direction, which is the customer's loss of amenity. And you just got to be careful how to balance that out.
All right, thank you, sir. All right, speaking of, Dylan brought up lunch. We're getting close to the witching hour there for lunch. Joe, do you have any other points you want to hit before we take a break?
Well, I think I could in 3 minutes probably. Well, let me ask the question. At least as of a few weeks ago, I was hearing outage reductions, basically, if I was understanding correctly, as being a benefit, possible benefit anyway. I've had a number of email exchanges on that with some people. Or is there still, are people still wanting to make that case? In other words, that energy efficiency reduces the likelihood of there being outages and people having disruptions in service.
Not a rhetorical question, folks. This is where you need to weigh in.
No, there's nothing coming from OPC on that, Joe.
Okay.
Thanks, Dylan.
Okay.
All
and
right.
then, yep, that's then the federal tax incentives are a separate issue.
Okay. All right. Anything else, or I guess what do you want to hit when we come back? You want to go back to the discount rate, or do you have more items you want to hit before that?
Yeah, well, I guess to the extent that, my hope was that this discussion would be somewhat informing and understanding where people were coming from in terms of their non-energy benefits, so that Sheldon and others could, if I was, trying to provide some response on discount rates and emissions criteria, emissions boundary, I would be kind of, okay, we're talking 10% of, whatever. If to the extent we could narrow that down, then it would make it informing for people to make that decision if they're trying to find, a number that seems reasonable to them.
So in a nutshell, until we make some kind of decision on the net energy benefits, or non-energy benefits, I should say, we really can't move forward on the other issues. Is that what I'm kind of hearing?
Well, maybe vice versa also, right? It may be the case that you just got to make a decision all at once, which is kind of where I come to. Just say what your number is, and then we'll get there.
Well, it sounds like folks are, and Dylan, I'll get you in a second. It sounds like folks are in favor of the adder, the concept. It's just we need a lot more details.
Well, and it could be like my job is to challenge stuff, right? I get paid to do that. It could be that everybody says, Joe, you're just too challenging, and or you ask too many dumb questions, and we can't even answer them anyway, even if they're smart. We're smart questions, and therefore we'll just use 10% of something, and so we should say what it is. Then I think Sheldon at least was at least he was saying that then they could start talking turkey on some of those other big items. If we know that NEBs are 10% of something rather than 20%, once we decide what that something is, then we're right, Sheldon. I shouldn't speak for you.
No, that's right. I mean, the issue is what's the whole cost effectiveness test going to look like, and is it reasonable?
All right, Dylan, I'm sorry, you had your hand up, sir.
But that's okay. I was going to go on that same line. I do think as we start to narrow the gap on some of these, we could start to sort of see the picture. At some point, maybe there's maybe, I don't know how much work this would be, Joe, to kind of start to consolidate, go back to your straw proposal and make changes based on consensus or near consensus, and sort of start to identify where the last sort of meaningful gaps are. I think that you have on your agenda this reduced price volatility, anticipating a 10% proposal. In fact, that's what OPC has made, and in the spreadsheet is a couple of studies that I think justify at least a 10% number, and that would just be on avoided energy. So just to be clear, and I don't know if folks have views on that, or we want to come back to that after lunch. And then the other one that I think is just helpful to get on the table so that people can look at the whole picture and we can maybe try and get the rest of the way is on methane. And so OPC proposed some specific numbers, which are also in the spreadsheet that Nicole sent around this morning on methane that we think are justified based on those studies. I haven't done the actual math on what, and maybe Joe, you might be able to do this quicker than me, to what those would actually mean to the carbon value, or put those in some dollars per megawatt hour terms. I don't know whether they would have a meaningful difference or not. I think it would be moderate, but meaningful. So those might be also worth looking at, and in order to do what sort of Joe and Sheldon are suggesting, which is being able to see what the whole picture is to figure out whether they can sort of compromise for
setting methane aside for a second anyway.
Yeah.
On your 10% for price volatility of avoided energy costs, that is in addition to the 10% adder that's going to be applied to something for all the other. So we'll then have a comfort, we'll have a comfort benefit, we'll have an arrearages benefit, we will have a O&M benefit, lighting O&M benefit, we will have of course all the emissions benefits, and we would have a price volatility benefit, and then we would have an additional 10%. Is that what I'm seeing? here?
This is not the proposal on the wholesale risk premium is not a participant benefit. It's not a proposal for a participant benefit. It's a system. We see it as a system benefit, and it would be just distinct.
Okay. So I definitely have more discussion around that, but so you're saying, so they are, anyway, they are distinct. Okay. That's the main question.
Sheldon, you had your hand up, sir.
Yeah. Yes, I don't want to get in the way of lunch too much, but I do have a lot of issues with the price volatility 10% adder. It's not making sense to me. It's sort of double counting the reduction in an individual's energy consumption. And I did some little bit of math, and I don't even see how you get I did a 30% change in price, and I get a tiny impact on the price effect on the customer who might have participated in an energy efficiency program. So I don't see a 10% adder for price volatility. I think that's a lot of double counting. So someone will have to explain that a little bit more.
Well, Sheldon, I would encourage you, and I know you won't be able to do it over lunch unless you're quirkier than you let on, but I think there are 2 studies that we sent, and I would encourage you to read those studies. At least 6 states apply this factor, and there's been analysis in the PJM territory that comes up with a 14% number. So that's why we provided them, and I'm sorry it wasn't earlier. Actually, I think we sent those out earlier.
Yeah, you did. They came in a couple of weeks ago from Nicole. But let me just say, in terms of, I know y'all think I'm just missing the boat on the participant risk, that if you go look at those wholesale risk premium studies, they're ultimately leaning on what's the risk to the customers, not participants, but customers. And that's why I go look at the customer side. So there's some jurisdictions that have that order utilities to go hedge on their fuel prices or other things, right? But the justification, the economic justification, I can send you some Brattle studies, a Brattle study if you want to look at it. You know, ultimately the justification for that is what is your, how much do the customers value that risk or that avoided risk?
Yes, but all customers, not just participants.
Yeah, no, I know that. Yeah, okay. So I'm not. By the way, I'm not referring to what you multiply by. I'm just saying that ultimately it's a customer risk, which is why I equated or put it on the other side of the ledger from the investment risk that the participants face.
Okay, well then you're really, I think, mixing apples and oranges, because those risks are well. If it depends what you mean by investment risk. Still, if you mean performance risk, then okay, I see that. If you think there's a risk that the actual kilowatt hour savings don't materialize, then I would guess I would buy that.
Well, it's not risk; it could be higher or lower. There's uncertainty associated with it, and so that's the same thing with the.
Yep. So I just think those are not those, and I think this follows the NSPM framework. Chris can weigh in, but I just don't see those as participant in the participant category, which is those are cost of benefits that are just sort of accruing in a bubble to some degree, around a participant in the program. Whereas what these are actually features that affect the whole system. You could say the customers, but I don't think there's a distinction between the customers and the system. But they're on the sort of utility system side, even though they reflect, changes in operations at a site. So that's why I think it's valuable to distinguish system impacts versus participants, and not sort of blur those together.
Chris, you had your hand up, sir.
Yes, I just wanted to chime in on this point. I agree with Dylan that the wholesale risk premium is really a utility system benefit, not a participant benefit. I understand Joe's point, but I think the example that he gave of regulators in some states potentially ordering future price uncertainty to be hedged by purchasing of medium to longer term contracts is kind of analogous to what we're talking about here, that the Maryland regulators and other policymakers in the state, in part, helping customers or helping the utility system really to hedge against that price uncertainty. I see your point, Joe, but I think it's on the whole better to think about it in that way as a utility system benefit.
All right. I think that's as good a stopping point as any. Why don't we plan on why don't we come back at 1 o'clock for part 2 of today's meeting, and we'll, Dylan, I'll let you or Nicole talk about some of the proposals you guys made that she circulated, and we also have to address the policies and the chart that Judge Burke sent out earlier this week. So we'll see everybody at 1 o'clock.
Good, thanks.